Ant-Man comes out a year later than it does in the real world, and it's pretty much the exact same plot. No changes whatsoever. Captain America Civil War would be a bit of a different film, mainly because T'Challa doesn't think that Bucky killed his father, so he would actually be on Cap's side, kind of taking the place of Hawkeye, who is retired by this point, for at least for now. And taking Black Panther's spot would be Reed. The rest of Fantastic Four don't appear because Sue is 8 months pregnant with Franklin, and Johnny and Ben are off fighting some other villain. Maybe you could do like a one-shot thing where we see him fight, I don't know, Puppet Master or something. Doctor Strange is basically the same movie. So let's just move on to 2017, which will begin with The Amazing Spider-Man 2. It would have a similar plot to Spider-Man Homecoming. The only real difference is that Liz's role would be somewhat downsized because Peter is with Gwen by this point. And secondly, Schultz, shocker, would be replaced by Electro, played by Jamie Foxx. Thor Ragnarok is pretty much the exact same movie, with the only difference being that the post-credit scene is a bit more similar to the one from the Black Lions What If Ultron was the main villain of the first MCU saga. The only difference being that the Ultron bots would obviously be swapped out for Doom bots based on their design from the V-Series. This would lead us directly into the final Fantastic Four film of this phase, which would be Fantastic Four Doomsday. As you could probably guess, Doctor Doom would finally be the main villain. His origin story would be basically the exact same as it is in the comics, as well as motivations, which would be explored throughout the film in flashbacks. Not entirely sure what his big plan would be, definitely to get revenge on Reed, but the only other thing I should probably note is that Franklin Richards would be born in this film, and will have a pretty massive role in the big two crossover films. Black Panther 2 is more in line with the original film compared to the actual Black Panther 1 in this timeline. However, there's a pretty massive change in that Namor and Atlantis have a very large role in the film. Taking the place of Ulysses Klaue is Atuma as a secondary villain. However, he ends up becoming far more powerful, betraying Killmonger, forcing T'Challa and Namor to have to team up with Killmonger in order to defeat Atuma. Killmonger sacrifices his life in order to kill Atuma, and a post-credit scene teases Doctor Doom, which will lead into Avengers Doom War. Will be the equivalent to Infinity War for this saga. As you can probably guess, Doctor Doom would be the main villain, with him wanting to gain enough power in order to take over the world.
Of course!
Silver Surfer would be introduced in this film, setting up Galactus to appear later down the line. By the end of the film, Doom would manage to steal the power and life force of Wanda, which breaks Vision, obviously. And using the power, he becomes God Emperor Doom and takes over the world.
Of course!
Before we get to the second part of the big finale to the saga, we'd have two more projects. Starting off, Ant-Man and the Wasp, which would be identical to the actual movie. Although the post-credit scene will be changed to show Scott and Hope getting enough particles for Ghost's cure. And once they leave the quantum realm, they come back to a world that has vastly changed. And then we get Captain Marvel, which would be pretty much the exact same movie, except Yon-Rogg would be swapped out for Gravik, a Skrull trader working with the Kree. During the climax of the movie, he would be exposed to cosmic rays that would give him power similar to the Fantastic Four, which is interesting because by this point, the Fantastic Four don't exist. This is the 90s, remember? He is ultimately defeated, and other than that, it's the exact same movie. Avengers Endgame will be the big finale to the saga. All of the heroes come together to undo what Doom did to Earth, or as it's now known, Latveria. The main characters will be Tony, Reed, Peter who would get the symbiote, and the Silver Surfer. The big plot of the film would be similar to the actual Endgame, where it's a heist, but rather than it being a heist for the Time Infinity Stones across time, it's a heist where one group of heroes goes to rescue Reed from Doom's castle, while another group gathers incriminating evidence by traveling through time in the quantum realm, which isn't affected by Doom's powers. And they use it. With this evidence, they reveal Doom's deceptions to the world, inspiring the citizens to revolt against him. This causes Doom to go somewhat insane, and he prepares to mass slaughter all of the heroes and essentially erase them from existence. There's a big fight where all the heroes come together against Doom. However, as it turns out, all this was planned. Meanwhile, the Silver Surfer went off and recruited Galactus to devour Latveria and use the Paracosmic mixed with Franklin Richards' powers in order to rebuild Earth. Doom ultimately meets his end after Reed steals his powers and uses them to erase Doom from existence, at the cost of his own life. With that, Galactus then devours Latveria, though thankfully all the heroes are able to get the citizens off of the planet. Then, using Franklin Richards' powers, Paracosmic, they rebuild Earth, and everything basically goes back to normal, aside from Reed and Johnny Storm, who would have been essentially the Black Widow death of this film, are still dead. The epilogue to the saga would be The Amazing Spider-Man 3. It follows a similar plot to Far From Home with a few changes. First of all, Peter has a symbiote. Second of all, Tony's still alive, so the name of Edith would probably have to be changed. And third, this isn't something super big, but I would have Rhino appear at the beginning of the film as like a one-off villain for Spidey to fight before we get into the main story.